Hi, everyone. I am Tianyin from UIUC. This is the Lightning version of my presentation at the Confluent workshop. My presentation is about telling the backstories of the continuous configuration testing project me and my students have been working on over the past 2 years. And I really hope you have a chance to check out my presentation. But otherwise, I'm just going to walk you over what is inside. And I think with this audience, it's just a cliche to repeat the importance of configuration management, especially from the site reliability perspective. And in my talk, I listed some numbers reported by companies about the characteristics of configuration management in internet and the cloud company. And there are two typical type of bad config changes which constantly causing production incidents, namely the bad config values, which leads to unexpected production system behavior, and also those valid config changes which trigger dormant unknown bugs in production code. So I shared my own journey in defending against those bad config changes and preventing them from being deployed to the production. Starting from my project named Specs, which first a configuration interface and found a large number of software defects related to configuration, to my later project named the pcheck, which automatically generates config checking code and insert them into the system program to capture misconfigurations as early as possible, hopefully in the system's initialization phase. I also shared my experience in industry trying to figure out the effectiveness or the impact of those research in preventing real-world production incidents related to configuration. And the takeaway is that the research is kind of limited in addressing some of the very hard problems, including those very nasty, sophisticated and subtle errors, as well as those bugs triggered by valid config changes, in which case the root causes are even outside the config, but actually rooted in the source code. So I want to addressing those bigger and harder problems. And I hope to convince you that what we really need is some very specialized testing techniques which can effectively and efficiently test every config change together with the code and be able to observe the program behavior under the changed configuration, so that we can preventing bad configs from affecting our production systems. So the key idea of such specialized testing we named the C-test or configuration testing is to connect production configs to software tests. So essentially what we really care about is our production environment, right? Essentially the production system under the production configuration. And here the production configuration is constantly changing since we are managing it continuously. So ideally, we should focus our testing efforts to just test the exact same piece of code and the exact config, right? But since the config is changing, we should always test the config we are going to deploy to production. But if we look at the test cases in popular mature open source projects, we realize our existing test cases cannot really supporting such type of tests. So at the point, I introduce configuration tests, or C-tests in short. Essentially, a C-test is a software test characterized by configuration parameters, right? So they are run by instantiating the input parameters with concrete configuration values. Essentially, the values you are going to, deploy to production. So I show some concrete C-test and how they are able to capture those sophisticated and the subtle bad config changes, especially those very hard configuration changes. And C-tests support continuous integration and deployment. We have test selection and prioritization algorithm, so that we only need to always run a very small subset of C-tests rather than run all the C-tests available. And the last but not the least, C-tests can be directly generated from existing software tests, which is extremely powerful because we can reusing the abandoned test suites in our projects and turn them into task force just for our config changes to making sure they are safe to deploy. And I'm more than excited to discuss C-test with you at the workshop time. And hopefully, I can see you there. Thank you very much.